Hi folks, welcome back again to the discipleship module. We're down to the subject number 8. It's week number 9, although technically we've done 10 weeks because we did an introduction as well. But we're thinking about how discipleship connects with mission. And it really should. And I know I don't like using the word should, but very often the way missions work is a reflection of the people that are going into missions, and we should be thinking about what the church's mission is, which is to go into all the world and make disciples. And so we should see discipleship in the way mission's done. Think of some of the missions that you know, missionary partners that you support, or people that you work with, people that you've seen in mission. What does mission look like? And is there an element of discipleship in it? Do you see that in what they're doing? So we're going to have a think about a few of those sorts of questions. I've forgotten to change that up there. Look, I've changed it on the next slide, but there we go. We're thinking about what mission looks like. And one of the things that helps us understand what mission looks like with discipleship is to understand what mission looks like without discipleship. What are the issues going to be? What is it going to look like if we don't do discipleship when we're doing mission? So imagine you're going off, or you're sending somebody off to a tribe somewhere, to a foreign location, to share about Jesus. And what do they take with them? Just their Bible, a Bible and a spade, or a trowel so they can build stuff, some medicine to start a hospital. And we think about, well, what does it take to go into mission, and what are we trying to do? Well, essentially what we want to do in the place we're going to is to develop a whole church community, to disciple people there. Remember, everybody is different. People think differently. Tribes of people definitely think differently from others. And the connections that work in your community might not be the same, or the understanding that you have in your community might not be the same as the community you're going to or you're sending people to. So we need to be very aware of what discipleship looks like in an individual context. Sometimes without discipleship, we end up with people going to do a task. Now, in doing mission, there will be tasks, there will be things to be done, but there'll be that connectivity to the main cause, the purpose, the discipleship of people. Without it, sometimes the tasks can get a little lost. Let's have a look at some of the kind of models that have been used historically. First one would be the social welfare model. I've mentioned a couple of historical studies or ideas around social welfare in the notes. Social welfare is the idea that we go and help people. And that is very important. We need to understand that people are not just a soul to be saved. They're a whole person that needs to connect with God as a person. And so social welfare can be an amazing opportunity to get into countries. My grandfather was a chemist, and that allowed him to go to Japan and rebuild after the Second World War, because he could help them make medicines and things like that. So that's what he did. The social welfare aspect is to say, well, we want to help you as people. There can be issues with it in lots of different ways. For example, it can feel like you're bringing to people more than just your faith. You're bringing your whole culture, your way of doing things, and that doesn't necessarily work. Africa is a complicated continent. Nations in Africa are very complicated things. And what Britain did was send out people, and they sent out missionaries, but they sent out builders and engineers. They sent out people who could do all sorts of tasks, and they cross-pollinated, and there seemed to be this sort of subculture of Britishness in different places, and people learned to do things the British way. And yet it seems almost like faith was just a sub part of that. Instead of bringing Jesus to their culture and to their world and to their engagement and engaging with them there, they would bring a whole subculture, plant it in the place, and provide support. And the outcome of that is that people don't necessarily connect with Jesus. They see this as a British thing. You still get it in India, you still get it in Africa. When you go to India, when I've been in India, people see a white guy and they start begging. They've got a job. They're well off. They're busy people. They've got proper lives, but they see a white person and they think, oh, white people give us stuff, so let's ask for money. And they ask for money just because you're white. See, their recognition is that this is what the colonial system did, brought us stuff. So give us stuff. I want stuff. And you've got stuff. Give me your stuff. And they can take for granted what it is you're really trying to do. It's much better to train them in their own systems and cultures to do the medicine, to do the education, whatever it might be. But the idea of social welfare is that we go and we help people. And there are good elements to it. And as I said, there are drawbacks. They can see the gospel as a white thing, as a foreign thing, not for their culture, not for them in their world. And you see when missions really impact the culture is when they don't stand separate, when they don't go and stand over people and provide them with what we've got. Because people don't see it as gospel for them. They see it as your gospel that you've brought for you. And with it comes some stuff. And we want the stuff, but we don't want the stuff that's you. We don't want your Britishness. And then you end up with a lot of anti-British feeling in lots of the world now. We empired a little bit too much, and people are angry at the British for doing this and that and the other thing. And so they throw out everything that could be British, including faith. Real mission needs to not bring faith in our culture to their culture. We need to bring faith to their culture. And that means doing it in a way that connects with people in their real lives. That doesn't mean we don't do social welfare, but we need to be aware of the impact of doing that we're helping people, that we're being part of their community, but we need to really connect. We need to be part of the community. There was a huge movement in South America based in pastoral theology, the idea that people need cared for and tended like a shepherd, and shepherding was a huge part of what they were talking about. And the aim of missions in these places was not just to teach, but actually to care and tend for people. But sometimes people want the care and don't want the gospel that goes with it. So it's a fine line in understanding and a fine line in living it out. One of the famous sayings is a quote attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, who knows where it actually came from, but the quote essentially says, in all circumstances, preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. Essentially, the idea is preach the gospel by your life. Preach about who Jesus is by the way you do things. And there can be some advantage to living out your faith. Paul, whenever we read it in 1 Thessalonians, he said, I didn't just share my faith with you, I shared my life as well in chapter 2. That it's important that we share life with people, but the gospel needs to be part of that. The words need to be part of that. And actually, to do good work without bringing Jesus into it is just like the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, or the government aid that's sent out by Britain to all the old colonies that we shouldn't have taken over. Or it's like the Muslims who do good work in different places. It doesn't say Jesus unless we say Jesus. And so we need to be careful that our missions don't become social welfare concerns that are not missions. And it's very important that when we come to people's tribes or communities or countries, that we respect the country, the culture, the attitudes of lots of things, but we bring them faith, as well as helping where we can and doing good things in the community, whether that's education or healthcare or helping them with money and things, or trying to have the fair trade society or whatever it might be that we're trying to impact. Those can be really helpful things if they're connected with the gospel. I have a concern that sometimes we're more concerned with doing good works than we are about bringing people to Jesus. If you bring people to Jesus, you will change their eternity, but you will also change their life. If you help them change their life, you might not bring them to Jesus, and you might not change their eternity. Now, I'm not saying that's unhelpful or unimportant, but the priority has to be that we bring people to Jesus. That's what real mission is. This is not a new debate. This is not a new challenge or concept. There's a sort of debate going back a couple of hundred years. I assume maybe you've heard the terms premillennial and post-millennial, and people who are premillennial or post-millennial. We'll not get into dispensationalism at the minute, but the idea of being premillennial, postmillennial, or amillennial. There are people who, when they read Revelation, it talks about 1,000-year kingdom, a millennium, when Jesus will rule on the earth. And there are people who think that the rapture happens before that. There are people who think the rapture happens after that. And there are people who think that 1,000-year kingdom is an analogy. It doesn't really exist. So people who are premillennial think that the rapture happens before that. People who are post-millennial think the rapture happens after that. And people who are amillennial think that 1,000-year kingdom doesn't exist. I hope I haven't lost you there. I know it's complicated, but this is Bible college. We've got to stretch you a little. Now, how does that relate to mission or outreach? Well, essentially, it's like this. If you think the rapture is going to happen before Jesus sets up his kingdom on the earth, then you're working towards the rapture. Does that make sense? It's coming first. Then Jesus will set up his kingdom. And if that's the case, then you're trying to prepare people for the rapture. You're trying to bring them to Jesus so that when Jesus comes back and people go to heaven, they will go to heaven. Does that make sense? So premillennialists are focusing on the rapture coming, on Jesus coming back again, on people going to heaven, and they want to bring people to faith now. Postmillennialists think that this 1,000-year kingdom is either happening now or will happen before Jesus comes back again. And so they want to prepare the way, not for Jesus coming back again, but for this kingdom coming in. This kingdom of good things where Jesus reigns on the earth in this world. The essential idea then is that they're working towards preparing a kingdom so that Jesus can then come back to it. Preparing a kingdom on this earth. And therefore the focus is on social welfare, on making a kingdom here, building a kingdom here. Amillennialists think there is no 1,000-year kingdom, so they're focused almost entirely on the rapture most of the time, because that's all that's happening. Jesus is coming back, and then we go to heaven. Forget the living on the earth. Now, I'm not challenging you to think one way or another about it. In essence, I think having a view that is both premillennial and postmillennial is helpful. Being amillennial, I don't understand. It's in the Bible, so I think it's there. But anyway, I'm not forcing you to believe one way or the other. Revelation is a complicated book, and I don't teach it very often because I don't like for people to be distracted by things that are less important. But what essentially the debate led to was then, if Jesus is coming back, we need to tell people about Jesus. And others were saying, but before he comes back, we need to prepare the kingdom for him. And so you have people trying to prepare the kingdom, doing good things, helping, and people trying to prepare for Jesus coming back. Makes sense that we need both, doesn't it? It makes sense that we're thinking about Jesus coming back, and we tell people that if they're not ready when Jesus comes back, they'll be lost. They'll not get into heaven, and they'll be judged for their choices. Then we also want to help them with their life and the things that are happening to them. We want to be real. We want to connect with them. If we focus entirely on social welfare, like post-millennialists would, we end up focusing on doing good for people here. But here is not the goal. Heaven has always been the goal. If we focus only on heaven, then we don't earn the right sometimes to tell people about heaven, about Jesus. Sometimes we need to help them with their real life here so that then they can ask for the reason for the hope that we have, like it says in 1 Peter 3:15. So when we focus on social welfare, we need to be careful that it's leading somewhere. But if we're only focusing on preaching, we miss out on what gives us the right to preach and the opportunity to get there. So the second model we'll talk about is the idea of a preaching model. People go into mission and they preach the gospel 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 and they tell people about Jesus and they tell people about Jesus dying and they tell people about Jesus rising again and they tell people about Jesus coming back again. Now that's important. I'm not saying we don't need to preach, but very often they find it falls on deaf ears and they blame the ears. They say, well, I preached the gospel. The Holy Spirit, if he wanted to use it, he would have used it. Very often there can be cultural barriers. They could be talking about things that make no sense in an African culture, in the culture of Papua New Guinea, of a small tribe in the middle of a forest. Their culture needs a closer message, a contact that isn't speaking to them from on high, but is connecting with them. Very often people struggle as well with being talked down to, being patronized. We call it patronizing, and patron is a good idea. We need patrons. We need people to look after us and to bring us up and to help us. But it sounds so terrible, very patronizing. And essentially what we're saying is that sometimes when we just go and preach to people and shout at them, we shout our message and people can't hear it because it doesn't translate to their culture, won't hear it because we haven't earned the right to share it. Or a third thing that happens sometimes is it gets drowned out by other messages. Just look at our own culture. Kids sitting the whole time on phones, on TikTok, on whatever the latest app is, whether it's Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or whatever social media is going on, and they're constantly being bombarded with messages. They think they're enjoying themselves, having a wee look at a wee video or a wee meme, and they're flicking through stuff like it's not real. But the messages are pounding at them. You need to look like this. You need to sound like this. You need to think this is important. You need to connect the way we connect. And that preaching drowns out so many other noises. So there needs to be a way of connecting that allows us to share a message and to connect with people and allow them to discuss that message, to think about it for themselves. One of the reasons Alpha works in so many cultures is because it says, right, what do you think? And suddenly people aren't just presented with all this material and told, you have to listen to that. They're presented with a whole lot of material and said, well, what do you think of that? And then they have a chance to respond. They have a chance to discuss. They have a chance to connect in with it. The other issue with the preaching model is that very often we stick to the gospel, which is important. We need to present the gospel and not drown it out with other things. When we go in and preach culture and go in and preach rules and go in and preach systems, that's not good either. But when we're only preaching the message of how to convert to Christianity, how to come to faith, we're missing all the building of church, preparing the next generation, leading people forward, and all the things that make it long last and have longevity. And the preaching model, you can see people go to a place, a lot of preaching happens, and sometimes people come home after 5, 10, 15 years and feel like they've done nothing. Nobody's become a Christian. Other times they go and people have become Christians, but as soon as they leave, that faith is dissipated and lost. They haven't prepared people for the next thing. The third model I struggle with sometimes is the idea of a build a church model. And by build a church, I mean like Build-A-Bear. If you've ever been to Build-A-Bear, you get to choose the pieces you like and you patch it together and you get this little patchwork bear that's your unique bear. But actually it's very like every other bear because the same patches or the same options are there for everybody and people are choosing the same things. But we come from our own little church culture, our own community. Maybe we're trained up at a certain Bible college or a certain missions college, and we go out and do it that way. And we don't just bring the gospel, we bring a particular type of church. And we try and recreate that kind of church in this new environment. Whether that's a charismatic church or a dyed-in-the-wool brethren preachy church or a worship-based church or whatever kind of church, that's not the point. The point is that we're trying to impose not just a faith and give people a faith, but a system and an organization and a way we do it. If you've ever had the opportunity to be at an African church where they sing for an hour and a half and they dance up the aisles to give their offerings and they preach for longer than I can stay awake, and the service is 4 or 5 hours and it's a whole thing and people get so dressed up for it and the pastor is given gifts by everybody and you think, wow, this is so different from how we do church. But if I go to Africa, I shouldn't try and change that culture, the way they do things. I should try and help them with faith, help them grow, help impact their life and their faith, but not impose my church, my culture, my system. I pray differently. That's okay. In actual fact, it's good. When we get to heaven, it says that there'll be people there of every tribe and language and tongue. And God wants that. He doesn't want to teach, he doesn't want us to go and teach them our language and teach them our tongue and teach them our church and our system and our philosophy. He wants them to be them and to be his children. And a sort of plug and play model. This is how church works. This is what we do. And, we have this great worship and I play the guitar and then it's so good and people enjoy the events and it's exciting and people think that's what church is. But they haven't grasped the faith that goes down deep. So I think all three of these models lack a depth of faith that only comes when you do discipleship in mission. Do you agree with me? That without the discipleship element, any other model is lacking something that will last, faith that will last. And so we want to include discipleship in the way we do things. I'm not saying we don't want to preach, or we don't want to build a church, or we don't want to do social welfare. I'm not saying that. But if we model that on its own in any one of the three things, or even all three of them, without doing the depth of faith, without teaching people to know Jesus on a deeper level, we will not leave a lasting legacy in that place. So how do we do mission then with discipleship? Well, what might it look like? Well, here's some of the things. There'll be a deeper connectivity. There'll be a deeper way of connecting with people. I was in the notes, I was talking about a couple of anecdotes. One of them's very well known and used widely. I don't know the origins of it. I probably should have referenced it better. But anyway, the idea is that a man goes into a couple of men go into this country to try and change this island and all the people on it. So one of them starts doing lots of programs and running things. The other one just gets to know a few guys and spends his whole time with 6 or 7 fellas. And the first one's looking at him, and he's hanging out with his mates, and he thinks, right, well, while he's hanging out with those guys, I'm going to start doing things. So he starts setting up a program of testing healthcare, and he sets up a program of teaching kids, and he starts teaching people songs and doing lots of things. And he brings his, and he starts a church, and some people get saved and they start coming to the church. A couple of years go by, and he meets up with the guy, and he says, why are you still not doing anything? The guy says, I'm doing loads. I'm helping these guys grow. And but the guy doesn't get it. He's so the two of them carry on doing their own thing, and the one guy, he's spent 3, 4, 5, 6 years with these young men, and they've got a bit older. They've got families. They've started to develop. But as he's got to know them, he's brought his faith with him, and he's connected with them on a deeper level, and he's started sharing his whole life with them. And then they've become Christians, and he's started to disciple them. He's prepared them to know the Bible, to read it for themselves. He's taught them how to pray. He's prayed with them, and they've experienced a deeper life with him. And they've got this deeper connectivity. A few years later, that man has to leave. But when he leaves, he prays for his brothers, and he keeps in contact. And those 6 or 7 guys bring up their families with faith, reach out to a few others. They disciple, and they start growing in their faith, and their faith community grows. The second man has to leave a few years after that. And as he's leaving, he realizes that there'll be nobody left to do the teaching that was there. There'll be nobody left to do the healthcare. The programs will all just stop because he hasn't prepared the next group of people. He hasn't connected at that deeper level. That might be anecdotal, but it's probably very much based on real situations. If we don't connect on a deeper level, we can't teach and bring through and train up the next level of leaders, and we can't prepare people for more. We aren't there when they need more than just our healthcare and our kindness, but actually our friendship and our compassion and our prayers and our whole lives. So discipleship should show a deeper connectivity, and it should see a holistic approach, see people as whole people. Like the social welfare will see that you need healthcare and need education and need all the rights of that people have, that we'll try and provide those. And discipleship isn't about saving a soul, it's about saving a person, connecting with a person and bringing them into the kingdom of God and the family of God. And so it's much more holistic than the preaching model, but has much deeper connectivity. As well as that, it will be individualized. It might not be one-on-one, but it will be much more based on the people that are there, their culture, their structures, their system, their families, their needs, their understanding. And so missions that do discipleship will connect with people and listen to them as much as teaching them. Like with Alpha, where they ask the question, well, what do you see in this? What do you get from this? They will understand it differently. And that's not wrong. It may be wrong, but it's not necessarily wrong. We want people to understand God for themselves, and their understanding should be different from yours. Their experience should be different from yours because their life is different from yours. And so discipleship sees that individuals will understand this differently. I want to prepare the whole church, but the whole church is a whole group of people who see things differently from me. That's why Paul writes letters to the churches and said, I know you get this, but you're not getting that. Or you've done really well in that. I see that you've grasped that and it's amazing, but you could add this to it. That we're looking at people in their culture, not trying to bring our culture with us, but trying to be in their culture and bring the faith. Along with that, it takes time to build those connections. It takes time to see people and to be there for their whole life. And it takes time to prepare material for a whole group of people. So it takes a commitment of 20 years or 30 years. My friends in Papua New Guinea have committed to 20 years there. They will learn the language of the people, learn how to read and write in that language, translate the Bible in that language, teach them to read in that language, to read and write, and then teach them the Bible and teach them the faith and teach them how to build the church and how to bless others, and then give them the opportunities to grow and lead the next generation of the church and go to other local tribes and share the message and walk with them as they share with other tribes around them the faith of Jesus. They'll develop the next set of leaders so that when they're moving on, things will be able to continue. These individual programs and commitments take time. And so people will connect on a deeper level and a more consistent level. Essentially, if we go back to the parable of the sower, we're thinking about different ways to sow seed. In the parable of the sower, God is sowing seed. But essentially, he uses us to sow seed with the next generation. And sometimes it's like just throwing the seed out there and hoping it hits. Maybe that's the preaching model where we throw the seed out there. Maybe we go to a field that needs seed and we plant the seed there. And it maybe doesn't just need seed, it needs water. So we go and help them with the water and help them with the water and plant the seed at the same time. In the parable of the sower, Jesus talks about the plants that grow up fast, but then wither because their roots don't go down deep. And it's essentially saying, if you don't teach people to put their roots down deep, then they'll wither. They'll grow quickly maybe, but when you're gone, they don't have the strength or the knowledge or the experience to carry on. See, discipleship is about carefully taking the seed, identifying each seed individually and planting it carefully. Working not on the idea that we plant the whole field, but that I plant this small area and I plant it carefully and I water it and I feed it and I help it grow. I watch out for the weeds and try and carefully remove them. You see, discipleship is a more careful, more considered approach than a program-based, preaching-based, social welfare-based, church-based, idea-based mission. Discipleship and mission is saying, I will go to that place and I will carefully plant the seed. I've seen people do this. My uncle, when he went to Cyprus, went for many years, but didn't go to the big local church, the English-speaking church down the road. He started his own community. He read the Bible with people in their homes. He taught them to read their Bible. He found a lot of people in Cyprus were migrant workers that came for 2 or 3 years and then would return to the Philippines or Nepal. They would come to care for old people or do work on the roads or do different things. But it gave them 2 or 3 years to feed carefully into them, to teach them how to read the Bible for themselves, to walk the journey with them. They would return back to the Philippines and he would keep in touch. Actually, it was my aunt more than my uncle that would keep in touch. He would send them a message every week of what passages they read in the church services, what hymns they sang. They would send them CDs of all the music that they sang in church so that they could join in even though they were on the other side of the world. They carefully trained up people, knowing that in 2 years or 3 years they would leave. My uncle visits some of those people. Even though you're not really meant to preach in Nepal, one of the guys has a series of churches now that he has trained up other leaders, and they have a few churches. And one of the guys that he's trained up is helping pastor these churches. I'm not here to big up my uncle, but I understand what he was doing. He wasn't thinking, let's run a program, let's do a big show, let's be noticed as the missionary couple. There are many missionaries in Cyprus. He didn't join the big English-speaking church and go and preach there and be the best preacher they'd ever heard. He discipled people. And a lot of the people he discipled weren't the big, obvious people, weren't the rich people. They were the ones who would struggle, but he would teach them and train them up and connect with them on that deeper level. So we should be thinking about this idea of careful planting, of investing in missions that aren't just throwing money at a problem or throwing the seed out there and hoping that somehow it lands, but that we're careful in how we invest, because we want the people that we invest in to be carefully investing what we give. The New Tribes Mission group that we support have a book that they use, and very often they'll translate this book into the language of the tribe that they're teaching, because they say, as well as translating the Bible, we want to show you how to disciple others. And this book is helping you disciple others. It's called Stranger on the Road to Emmaus, because when Jesus met 2 of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, just after he rose again, they said, well, how do you not know what happened to Jesus? And he said, let me explain to you. And he starts with the books of Moses and goes right through the Old Testament and explains to them all the message, all that it says about him, all of the plan of God that he's the middle of. And this book kind of imagines that we're doing the same, that we're helping people understand the whole plan of God that's centered around Jesus, all that the Bible says, and help them understand and bring them through. It's not enough just to preach at them. We want to train them up and bring them through and help them go on with their faith too. The same should be true in local mission. As we try and do things locally, we shouldn't just hope that people turn up and hear a message because we invited a good speaker. We need to bring people. We need to walk the journeys with them. We need to disciple them into faith, and we need to help them then grow and develop and be the next leaders of the church. It's about careful planting, about working where your area is and in the way you can, and not trying to be all that you can be to everyone. I know Paul said he would do that, but I struggle with that. I end up knackered and I feel like I achieve nothing. Local mission should say the same as big mission, that we're trying to help people come to know Jesus and walk with him and follow him, and will teach them all of his commands, as Jesus said in the Great Commission. So I wanted you to think about how discipleship connects with mission. Think about some of the missions that you've heard of that you support. Why do some of them work? Why are some of them very good? What way does it all connect together? I hope that you've understood that, and we'll have a chat later in the week.